So it's been a little while since I was able to update the Peugeot 205 GTI build in 1/8 scale. Now the story is that you get monthly packages and therefore you sometimes have to wait in order to finish a certain part of the build. So in the first episode I started on the engine and then started finishing off the chassis in the later episodes. So after finishing off the chassis and engine bay in that last video, that was about 6 to 7 months ago, I simply had no more parts to continue the build, so it was a long wait. Like I said, about 6 or 7 months. Now last week I received the last package to finish off the interior for the most part, so I decided to go back to the build and start moving on with that. So I hope you guys don't mind all too much that it does take a little bit for these episodes to come out, as I'd rather have a complete build section done in one episode than have a new episode showing a couple of parts for a couple of minutes every month and not really show any progress at all. So my preference is to do this step by step with a little longer wait in between and then an actual good episode to show you guys. So now let's get back to the actual build itself. So if you've seen the other episodes in this series, you probably already know, and if you have not, this kit is already pre-painted, doesn't really require any glue. It is simply put together with press fittings, snap fittings, or actually just screwed together. So there's not really that much of a build, so to speak, but more of an assembly process to go through with a really detailed selection of parts for the engine bay, the chassis, most of them even functioning and having all sorts of electronics included as well. The build is supposed to be very realistic, and so far I have not been disappointed. And going with the interior, I'm not disappointed all that much either. The chassis piece, or the main floor pan piece, is pre-painted in red, and then you have a lot of sticky back carpet that is pre-cut to size that needs to be stuck in part for part. And along the way there are also a couple of parts that need to be screwed in. Now of course with the first package of this actual entire build you do get a small screwdriver, but eventually that starts to get really old, screwing in hundreds and hundreds of screws by hand with a small screwdriver. It also starts to hurt your hand if you're doing this long enough. So I decided to upgrade my setup with a wow stick. This is a sort of pen style screwdriver. It's really quick, really strong, and it works really well, and I've enjoyed it a lot. Now, just to be fully transparent, I have paid for this myself. I have not been in contact with WowStick. I simply just love the idea, and the actual tool itself works wonders. So if you are interested, I will be sure to leave a link down in the description below. So with a couple more pieces of the carpet laid down, there are some smaller sub-assemblies, in this case the handbrake, that also need to be assembled and screwed in place. Overall, I'm really happy with the way that carpet is coming out. It is not a perfect fit in every spot, and it also doesn't line up super well on everything, but that is probably a little bit of user error and some other spots simply just not being fully covered. But overall, with the main base plate or the base interior piece already being painted red, it doesn't really show up all that much with later pieces being put on top of it. Although I could have decided just to skip this step entirely and simply just flock this main piece with red flocking. I think this is a good alternative for some of the beginning builders and not going overboard with additional extra options that have to be applied aftermarket and require a certain skill level. So like I said, mostly the parts are just a snap or screw together fit and don't require any gluing. On the other side there is a small vent that somehow was completely misaligned, so I simply just cut off the tabs and glued it in place to have the correct alignment. That does happen sometimes, but overall most of the parts fit together perfectly well with a bit of force. So during the fit up of a lot of these parts, there are some electronic switches that need to be installed here and there for some of the lighting to actually work and function, and in this case for the pedal box to also start or be the actual switch of some of these parts. One thing I was kind of disappointed by was the actual trunk liner itself. The main floor pan was carpeted with nice red carpet, and then the main trunk itself was simply just bare black or gray plastic. Now I could go back and add some flocking on top of it just to finish it off and tie it in with the rest of the interior, but I would like to know if you guys want to see that or not. If I can simply leave it like this, just let me know down in the comments below, but if you want to see me upgrade and update it a little bit with a bit more flocking, feel free to let me know as well, and I will probably tackle that in one of the upcoming videos on this build. One of the other things that I wasn't really all that happy with are the backs of the seats. They have very ugly holes where the screws are supposed to go in, of course, to screw it all together, and they simply just fixed it by adding a couple of stickers in it, which, by the way, are massively nicely matched with the rest of the paint on the back, so they don't really stick out all that much, but still they're basically just stickers on top of screw holes to hide it all. It would have been nicer if these were just a simple push type press fit part and you wouldn't even have the all the holes in the back, but I guess for rigidity and the actual strongness of the entire part, it is better to screw it all together. But again, with a bit of a press fit with a male and female fitting, I think that should have been fine too. In this case, it is hidden pretty well and it is on the back of the seat, so it won't really be visible after the entire build is finished. But for a kit of this level, I think that could have been thought out a little bit better. Now on the other side there is a plus point to these seats. They are mounted to actual rails, so they do slide forward and backward, and also the backrest is retractable front and back too. The main floor pan, front and back seats are now completed, so I could move on to the dashboard itself, which by itself is a pretty interesting build too. A lot of the parts are separate components, have a little bit of a different color, but overall just a super nice and crisp detail in them. So the pedal box has a couple of switches, and the actual instrument cluster has a couple of LEDs in them, so this will light up after you finish the entire build, and actually added a couple of batteries in it, and along with that pedal box, probably some of the exterior lighting will be functional too. In order to actually control a lot of these lights, you use the actual pedal or button that is used in the 1-to-1 scale car too. Like for instance, a couple of buttons on the dashboard for the exterior hazard lights probably, and some of the other lights will be controlled via this panel and these actual buttons. And with that, most of the interior is now completed. There will be a couple more parts for the door panels and other stuff later on to be added, but for now that is the main interior completed and ready to get mounted to the main chassis. Now there are a couple of wires on the chassis itself already, which need to be connected up to the ones from the interior and also to the circuit board itself. Now I can understand that this seems like a bit of a mess, which it actually kind of is. The wires are really finicky and really clearly marked, so it is a bit of a mess, but it is an organized mess, if I can call it that. Some of these wires simply need to be put through the hole and then connected onto the actual circuit board itself. It is perfectly labeled which wire needs to go where, so you don't really need the instructions, but for what you do need the instructions is the way to route them and where to mount them to the actual chassis so they won't be in the way later on and can just safely be stuck down. So all of the wires have now been connected to the actual circuit board. The battery box and circuit board have now been mounted to the chassis permanently. A little heat shield and also an exhaust needed to be mounted as well. And that's pretty much it for the chassis, I think, at this point. And we can then move back onto the actual top side of it, connecting the actual steering wheel to the steering mechanism itself. That was a bit of work. Took a couple of minutes and might have slipped out a couple of swear words here and there, so that needed to be cut out of the video. But as you can see, it actually functions. It is connected up. It is a bit of a tight squeeze, but it does actually work in the end. And with that said and done, we can permanently mount that interior to the chassis. So with the interior now finished, we can move on to the next stage in the build, and that is mainly focused on the exterior and probably a couple more of the interior pieces. But for now, we have to do with only the body shell now being delivered and put into place, and that's pretty much it. I'm guessing another 6 months and then this entire build can be finished off, maybe I have another update in the meantime, or at least I hope to have another update in the meantime. But for now, it is back into its cage for another 6 months, maybe sooner, but I'm not sure at this point. And then I'll see you guys when I have more parts to show and hopefully finish off this entire build soon. So sorry for the long wait, but I hope you